Mary and Jeannie, who completed the Narrative Enneagram Teacher Training Program with Helen Palmer and have studied with many of the Master Enneagram teachers in the field. And I think that's going to be just so evident as you hear them. I mean, their wisdom is just awesome. Jeannie has an Enneagram business in the Philadelphia area, and Mary is a certified advanced Enneagram coach and works at the Christian Center of Park City in Utah. In addition to that, they are partners in Enneagramoms, which is their joint teaching business, and Instagram account, which is focused on parenting. They're passionate about helping parents discover the beautiful truth of who they are and their children through the powerful tool of the Enneagram. And so we are excited to turn it over to Mary and Jeannie.
Thank you, everybody. We are really excited to be with you this afternoon and to share with you an area of Enneagram study that doesn't get a whole lot of attention, but we think is really helpful to our growth path. If you've been working with the Enneagram at all, you know that it's a model of based on triads or groups of three. And so today we're going to be talking about the three instincts. You may have heard about the instincts in terms of the subtypes, so a self-preservation too, and so forth. But today we're going to talk about the instincts as a standalone concept. So whether or not you're connected to the Enneagram, it's still pretty interesting stuff to think about. The Enneagram, you know, is really so much more than just 9 types. It's a really deeply rich model for personal development, and we really enjoy mining the layers to find new insights that move beyond just our type. So these three instincts that we're going to be talking about are rooted in the animal wisdom within us. We are part of the animal kingdom. They're biological drives, and the three that we're going to be talking about are the self-preservation instinct, the social instinct, and the sexual or one-to-one bonding instinct. And we rely on these to survive and thrive. They're at play as we determine what we value, what motivates us, and where we place our focus of attention. But most importantly, we're going to be wanting you to think about where you place your energy or what you give your energy to in your life. Understanding the instincts can be really helpful in determining why it's so hard for us to change. Think of them as kind of hardwired into our brains. And I don't know about you, but for me, there's areas that that I have wanted to change, tried to change, and some things are just really, really hard to move on. And I think most of us can probably experience that in our life. So while our type teaches us about a lot of our behavior patterns, understanding the instincts is really just as important because it sheds light on aspects about ourselves that are really deeply entrenched. Think about it back to the animal kingdom, like asking a squirrel not to collect nuts in the autumn. It's, you know, you're asking too much. The squirrel has to do that. It's a drive. And this is how our instincts are. They're so hardwired in that our reactions are really automatic and really fast, and they're just kind of part of our consciousness. The dominant instinct that you have, which is one of those three, does not want to be negotiated with. It's kind of like saying or feeling, if I don't have this or do this, I'm gonna die. Now, this is not a conscious thing. You're not literally saying to yourself, if I can't have this, I'm going to die. But the way that you're operating is like it's such a big deal that that's really what it boils down to. It's that sensation of, I'm not going to be okay if I don't have this or do this. So why do we work on the instincts? Beyond a concept, we work on them so that we can offer ourselves more flexibility and choice in how we respond in all situations in our lives. And that's what Enneagram work is really about. It's increasing our repertoire so that we can show up in more resourceful and more productive ways in all of our dealings and all of our relationships. Over to Jeannie.
Thanks. I'm Jeannie. Nice to meet you guys or see you, some of you that I know. Hello. So one thing to keep in mind as we're looking at all three of these, similar to Enneagram types, we hold pieces of each of these. These three instincts are at play in all of us in varying degrees and varying levels. And so a lot of times there's a focus on which is my dominant instinct. A better question may be around the idea of
how do I interact with each of these three instincts? And at different times in life, an instinct can become more prominent. And we'll get into that as we talk more. But there is one instinct that generally gets the majority of your focus and attention. It's just your natural space where you're going to put your focus and attention. And as a result, your values are going to be determined there. Then there's another instinct that you're kind of play with. There's some of it that shows up at times and other parts are not in sync with you and you're trying to figure that out. And then there's a third instinct that kind of all of the energy is kind of spent and you don't put very much time or energy into that space. And so that's your repressed instinct. In Enneagram types, we talk about subtypes, and that is explaining what your dominant instinct matched with your dominant Enneagram type is. And we're not going to go into the breakdown of all of those because we have such a short period of time to talk, but we just wanted to at least introduce that concept. And there's a lot of great writing and a lot of great podcasts out there. You'll get an email with some of that information afterwards if you want to explore how the types meld with the subtypes or with the instincts to make your subtype. And finally, I just want to talk that we love studying the instincts because it's such an amazing opportunity for grace and for growth. Like I said, your dominant instinct determines what you value. And as a result, if somebody else has a different dominant instinct, you're naturally going to have areas where you don't have the same idea of what the most important thing is or what the value is. And so by learning this information, it brings a rationality to somebody else's choice that helps you have grace for that choice rather than being disrupted by it or can't believe they would spend their time and money on that. There's at least the logic behind it that can allow you to be more gracious. And then the other area is growth. A lot of times people learn their Enneagram type and then think, well, what do I do practically in daily life? Your instincts is where you live your daily life. So as we talk about how they look when they're in and out of balance, you'll get some ideas about if I put some more energy here, I sort of have energetic deadness here. So I can reallocate some of my energy and try to take some risks in this area to bring more balance into my life. All right, back to Mary.
Okay, we're going to start by describing the three instincts, and I'll begin with self-preservation instinct. And this is the instinct that is my dominant. I'm also a type 1 on the Enneagram. So people who lead with the self-preservation instinct have first and foremost an underlying drive to survive through providing for the basic physical and material needs of life. Think about the animal kingdom and how much of a top priority food and shelter are. And think about animals spending all that energy in creating their burrow and stockpiling food. This is the kind of energy that the self-pres is all about. This spring at our house, we had a bird's nest that was knocked down. And when you watch a mama bird with that methodical determination and just, remaking that nest, and that's the kind of energy that the self-pres is all about. There's a grounded, consistent, steady as she goes kind of vibe to self-preservation people. So for each of the three instincts, we're going to talk about areas or zones of concern. For the self-preservation, that first area is the physical self. So self-pres people are going to be concerned with health and well-being, self-care, food intake, and nutrition. We're going to talk about how it's in balance and out of balance. So I'll continue and I'll give you a couple of examples. But so self-preservation people might be the folks who always have their refrigerator stocked. They didn't have to worry about toilet paper during early COVID because they always have extra toilet paper on hand, as well as canned goods and extra paper towel and whatever it is that you need. Most self-preservation people will provide, have those things on hand. They typically give a lot of energy toward their health with exercise and vitamins and getting their annual checkups and things like that. Some of the other dominant other instincts don't even think about those kinds of things. Most self-pres people will have some sort of a concern around food. So when this is in balance, it's a healthy thing. And this is, your friends or people in your life who, for them, it just seems to be easy for them to eat healthy. But when it's out of balance, it can be a preoccupation. So someone who has an eating disorder, for instance, or is rigid about health and exercise can sometimes be a self-preservation out of balance. Likewise, if somebody is struggling with overeating, that can also be an example of that same instinct, but out of balance. I like to always share an example of my own growth. And as a self-preservation person, this was a story that is an example of how I think I've loosened that instinct a little bit. In our family, there's 4 of us, and my husband and my son are social dominant instinct. My daughter and I are very high on self-pres, and the guys are low on self-pres. So we would go on a family road trip and have a conflict around eating. Now, I don't know about in your households, but for us, there are conflicts repeat. It's like the same old story. And my daughter and I would be willing to drive 30 miles out of our way to find the healthy salad. And my husband is just like, keep going, do drive through. And this was, a source of frustration. And when I learned about the instincts, I realized, oh my gosh, I am making such a big deal about this because I feel like I will die if I don't have something healthy to eat. My daughter would literally feel like she would die if she had to go to a drive-through. So being able to loosen that up a little bit, notice it for what it is and say, you know what, once in a while, peanut butter crackers at the gas station on our trip is not going to kill me. And likewise, my husband now knows that it is very important to me, and he's much more willing to drive some of the time to out of the way for the healthy food. But just an example of how when we understand the differences in our dominant instincts, we can judge each other less and offer each other a lot more compassion and openness. So the next area that self-preservation people are very concerned with is the practicalities of daily life, like finances and maintenance. When self-pres people are in balance, they're fiscally responsible. They know how much money they have in the bank. Some people actually don't know that, or they overspend. Self-preservation people are usually pretty good at managing these things. They might be coupon clippers. If it's out of balance, they might spend $4 on gas to save $2 with the coupon at Target, which is when it's not working for you. But generally, they're concerned about maintaining things, their finances, their life. And so doing a do-it-yourself project at home can be oftentimes enjoyable for self-pres people. If not enjoyable, it's certainly fulfilling. The grass is cut, and when something breaks around the house, it gets fixed. And then the last area is around domesticity, cultivating a home and being aware of comforts. Self-preservation people, think back to that nature example, they want their comfy nest. So they're probably more likely to choose the deep, comfy sofa rather than the one that looks sharp. They're oftentimes aware of things that other people aren't aware of. They can be sensitive to the lighting in a space, the temperature, if it's too hot or if it's too cold is irritating. If you're a person like I am who has to cut the tag out of anytime you get a new shirt, or if your socks, if you feel that little edge of the sock and it bothers you all day long, those are self-preservation things. So that's self-preservation. I would also just like to add a word about balance. When you have balance in your instincts, you're going to experience an ease and a strength in that department. So these are things that you bring to the table that are resourceful and productive and good for you and those around you. When it's out of balance, that's when you're going to feel compulsions, stress, and preoccupation. That sense of, if I don't have it, I'm not okay. Okay? All right, Jeannie's going to talk to us about our next one.
All right, we're going to jump into the next instinct, which is the sexual instinct or the one-to-one instinct. And it's a very different energy than that concept of the animals making their burrows. This is the part of the nature documentary when mating season occurs, and all of a sudden, these docile little creatures risk getting eaten by predators. They get into competition with others, and they are driven for the intensity of trying to find a connection. And while the sexual instinct isn't always about a sexual relationship, it's about that same energy and drive. So I want you to think about activating energy as you think about the sexual instinct. The first area of focus for this type is that desire to be energized or turned on. So somebody that's dominant in this area is going to walk into a room and look around and figure out who's got the sizzle in here, who's got the juice, who's somebody I can connect with and have a great conversation. Or it could be about a physical attraction, but it could also be a connection on an intellectual level, that looks like a really funny person that I could really enjoy myself with. So there's different reasons you're drawn, but it's that desire to deeply connect and engage with them. Let's see. Everyone who's been in the beginning of a relationship. Earlier I mentioned that at different times, some of these instincts can come up or down for you. And in the beginning of a relationship, regardless of what your dominant type is, there's that tendency to kind of get swept up and carried away by someone, and to be willing to lose sleep in order to have late night conversations and spend extra time together. And you don't quite get back to calling your mom back and all of those things because that energy has taken over. So that's a bit of the flavor behind that. The second area is attraction and charisma. And this is where if it's in balance, you're aware of who you're attracted to and you're aware of who's attracted to you. And there's energy going into that, but you have an ability to manage that in a way that's appropriate and enjoyable. And that allows you to make connections with people in order to take healthy risks. If it's out of balance in this area of attraction, that's when on the one side you can have that compulsion, that obsession with someone or with something. Again, this isn't always with a person. It can become an obsession with a hobby or an obsession with different interests or with your job or your career or your mission in life. So it can be all of that energy being focused in that way. That attraction to that thing gets out of balance. The opposite side of that, if you think of a seesaw, the counterpoint would be energetic deadness in this area. You don't have a drive, and again, sexually, but it could also be in an area of I don't have the energy to put forth to take the risk to make my career move happen, or in that area. So as you're paying attention, you can start to realize, oh, I know why now I'm not putting energy towards that, and maybe devote some more energy in that area to help you bring more balance to your life. And then the third area is fusion. And what that looks like is a kind of like the tunnel vision comes in for you with the sexual dominance, and you have your object of your connection, and then everything else sort of goes out of focus. One area that this shows up for people can be in a profound spiritual experience, a deep, rich connection to your God. And so it's, again, not always with a person. It can play out in many different scenarios. And I have a story of, I have a really good friend who's a sexual too, and she is super juicy. She's all about that connection and that energy and that, ooh, kind of thing. And whenever I go out with her, I get sucked right into that. So one night we were out for dinner and drinks, and we were sitting there, and I live on the East Coast, and it was night, and all of a sudden, like cold, drafty, icy air is pouring into the restaurant. And it shakes us from our conversation where we had been for 2 hours going like, oh my gosh, me too. I totally think that. Yes, we're so connected, right? And the waiter comes up and we said, why is the door open? It's so cold. And he said, ladies, I don't know if you realize, but just across the bar from you, a man had a heart episode and the paramedics were called. They came in, they have resuscitated him, and he's on the gurney and being taken out. So that's why we have the doors open. And we were like, holy, that all happened right there. And we didn't see it because we were so fused together, just the two of us against the world. So that's sort of, does that give you guys a flavor of what that energy is like and how different that is than I want to make sure my nest is comfortable and I'm safe. And it's a very, very different energy. Okay, from here I'm going to transition and talk about the social instinct. But before I do that, I want to point out something really fun that I learned. Whichever instinct you're least dominant in, oftentimes you want credit when you put energy there. So for basic human skills that everybody else that's okay in that instinct is doing, if you do it, you want credit. So if you're in the sexual instinct, if you're really low in that, then when you do get all gussied up and go out, you take off your sweats and put on the uncomfortable but really good looking outfit, you want to be noticed. You want like credit for like, I did the thing here. Last night, as we were talking about this concept, a girl shared that like for her, self-pres is really low. And when she goes to the grocery store, buys healthy food, comes home and cooks herself a dinner, she wants everyone to be like, wow, great job, way to do that. So as we're talking about these, kind of think of a basic human skill that you would really like to kind of get some credit for when you actually put energy to it, okay? All right, on to the social instincts. This is the concept of the herd instinct. So herd animals don't have nests and burrows, and they're not often twos. They're as a group trying to feel safe together. This is their strategy for how they'll be okay in the world, is they work together. They want to know that they have each other to find food, for warmth, for protection. If we're all stick together, we're going to be okay. This is the social instincts. And how that looks in 3 different areas is the first area is people that are dominant in this are really good at reading other people. They walk into a room and they have a sense of what is the feel in this room? What's going on? Am I okay? Am I invited here? Am I welcome? Are you good? Is everyone feeling like they have a place here? Who's in? Who's out? What is the power structure? And that's very different from the who's got the sizzle? Where am I going to go to make that connection energy? And it's also different than the self-pres who walks into a room and says, where's the air conditioning vent? Where are the snacks? Which is the most comfortable chair? Although I will say self-pres people often travel with their own food. So the snacks thing is or isn't a big deal because they've got a bag or a pocket full of something that they can sustain themselves should their food not be readily available to them. My husband always has a power bar with him just in case. So that's something to think about as you're trying to decide where you land. So when this is in balance, so the social instinct looks like being able to adjust yourself appropriately to what the feel is in the room. Maybe I shouldn't say this here. I don't know how this would go over, but you're able to stay true to who you are when it's in balance. If it's out of balance, on the one side, you have an obsession or a compulsion to worry too much about what the group thinks, too much about what's my place in this and why am I not getting enough attention or why am I getting too much attention, or that energy, that spin starts to happen when it's out of balance on that side. And then the other side of that is a lack of social awareness, to walk into a room where something sad has just happened and to walk in and tell a joke. That's a lack of awareness of the social situation and not adjusting accordingly. The second area is building and maintaining relationships. And some people get confused and think, well, I'm really introverted, so I don't think I can be in that social instinct because I don't like hanging out in big groups. But it's not about always being out, always being connected to a lot of people. It's about the nature and the flavor of the connections that you do make. So if your energy is with even just one other person around, how are you doing? How's your mom? What's going on with you at school right now? Those are the kinds of questions that somebody with a social instinct is interested in. They want to know how you're doing in the world, and they are interested in people's stories. And as part of maintaining the connections, they do a really good job of remembering what's going on with people and showing concern and returning to those things to make sure that people are okay. So you can be very introverted and still be dominant in the social instinct if that's where your energy is going. And then the third area, which is a really big deal, is participation and contribution. People who are socially dominant want to know that their lives matter. And while, again, we all have part of this, if you're socially dominant, it's a really big deal. If you're participating in anything, you want to know what your role is, who you are, where are you at in the pecking order of this group, and what do you have to offer. It's not always about what the organization is offering you, but it creates an opportunity for you to show up and provide who you are, and in a way that makes you important within the context of a group. So one area this plays out for me is in church. I often will sit and as I'm listening to a pastor talk, I'll be thinking about the impact of what they're saying is having on everyone in the congregation. It's not just about how it lands with me. I'm thinking, wow, if somebody's new, or if somebody's in a relationship, or if somebody's not in a relationship, or if they don't have kids, how is that all landing? That's all filtering through me while the person is speaking. And the other area is I need to know what my role is. Where do I get to show up and participate and contribute and be part of? Whereas my husband, who's self-preservation, he can go to church for a year and it never occurs to him until somebody says, will you please sign up for something? Then he'll think, oh, right. Yeah, I'll do that. I'm happy to do that, of course. But if I don't have a space of value in the community, then I'm all kinds of like disrupted inside. I'm not settled until I know where I land. So that's sort of how that instinct plays out there. Okay, that was a lot of information coming at you. So everyone take a deep breath and just let it sit for a second. Okay, Mary, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Okay, thanks, Jeannie. It's always fun to hear someone of that instinct describe it. So Jeannie being of social instinct, I could hear it again and again and always learn something new. So let's talk for a few minutes about how these instincts play out in terms of relationships. They really affect relationships. People who have different core instincts bring strength to a relationship. In other words, if I'm not good at something and you are, there's a nice balance there. But it can also cause a lot of disconnects. And Jeannie and I have observed that sometimes in friendships, partnerships, whatever the relationship is, that sometimes the differing instincts can cause bigger disconnects than even the differences within our type. So let's take a couple of examples, practical everyday situations. Let's say that somebody is sexual dominant and it's the anniversary of with them and their partner, and the sexually dominant person envisions celebrating by having like a romantic dinner and probably like trying to get reservations at a really trendy place that's hard to get into, so there's a spark there, it's something different, and they're looking for that sizzle in the evening, and the self-preservation person is kind of like, well, we could just stay home and change the light bulbs because we've been needing to do that for a long time. That's a really big disconnect. So that's where there can be disharmony in relationships when you have, that a differing dominant instinct. When the first house that my husband and I ever bought had a pretty sizable hole next to the stove, and big enough for a mouse to come through. And I remember saying, oh, we got to get that fixed really quickly. And my husband took the cutting board, put it over the hole and said, there you go. So that's low self-pres. That creates a disconnect. Another example would be, let's say you have a young couple and they're both social dominant. So maybe in their early dating life, they really enjoy dating with, in groups. They're with all their mutual friends. And then they're giving each other a lot of space to pursue their own social activities and their own friend groups, and maybe their involvements like committees or whatever it is that they do. But lots of energy out. And then being low on self-pres, things aren't getting attended to at home, and maybe they're spending too much money on eating out with friends, and a few years goes by and all of a sudden there's a lot of tension because they're looking at each other saying, well, how come you didn't get the shower curtain fixed? And someone was like, and why will you never participate in cutting the grass? And so being of the same underlying instinct can offer some compatibility, but it can also create problems. So we really just encourage you to start thinking about these instincts so that you can notice where it is that you bring energy and where you're not probably devoting enough energy to. It's all about the balance. If we don't notice it, we can't change it. So much of Enneagram work is just about noticing our patterns. And once we notice, old patterns tend to fall away kind of naturally when we just notice it without judgment. And with our relationships, when we can say, oh, that person is doing that because they have a completely different dominant instinct. They value something very different than I. And then rather than being frustrated with it, you can open up some space for, as Jeannie mentioned earlier, for grace. Oops, can't hear you, Jeannie.
Sorry. If you are in a relationship where you're doubled down, where you both have the same instinct, it's not a doomed to failure relationship, but it is an area to explore what are our blind spots? What are we missing together as a couple? And figure out how you can make adjustments in order to compensate for those things. So no relationship is doomed because of what instincts are at play. It's just a matter of bringing awareness so that you can have that compassion and that grace and see where your blind spots are and see where maybe you're overdoing things. One more idea that I want to offer you guys is that whatever your dominant Enneagram type is, this instinct work will really help you in that your dominant instinct is where your vice plays out the most. So whatever your vice or your passion is within your type, your instinct is where that's going to actually play itself out. And I'll give you an example with type 9 because it's a really clear one to understand. And then maybe you can apply it to your own type and try to figure out how this instinct is playing out with your type. So for type 9s, they struggle with self-forgetting. They go to sleep to themselves and their own priorities. If they're self-preservation, they can use things like folding laundry, mowing the lawn, purchasing things for the home in order to avoid putting their energy towards priorities that really should be taking their focus of attention. If they're sexually dominant, all of their energy can go into fusing with their partner, and then they go to sleep to themselves by making their partner's priorities their own priorities rather than their own. And then if they are social, they lose themselves by over-involving themselves within groups. And oftentimes, social 9s are actually workaholics. Sometimes they get a rep for being not as active, but social 9s are incredibly active and can be workaholics, but it's a way of not dealing with their own personal life then. If all of their energy is being spent at work or within the context of a group they're involved in, or even within a circle of friends, a small circle of friends, if their priority and energy is always going towards everyone else. My sister-in-law is a social 9, and whenever I ask her, how are you doing? She'll end up telling me about the lives of all of her friends instead of being able to talk about herself. So it's a way of self-forgetting through your instinct. Okay.
And then we wanted to just touch on a couple of terms that you might have come across in your Enneagram work. Some teachers will talk about the instinctual stack, and some will call it an instinctual sequence, but it's kind of like a 1, 2, 3 of how you use the instincts. Jeannie and I feel like it's not as important to figure out your stack or your sequence as much as it is to become aware of all three, because again, we all have all three instincts. We use all three instincts. And so it seems to make good sense to us to explore all of them and what your relationship is to them. This is kind of the Russ Hudson philosophy that one of our teachers, and he sort of talks about how do you dance with your instincts. And so rather than worrying about having to figure out your stacks, I see a lot of people, they kind of feel like they need to know what's the 1, 2, 3. Just look at them all and see, where am I in balance? Where am I out of balance? Where might I intentionally bring some energy? So we hope that all of this has given you some good food for thought as you think about your own instincts and how they play out in your life, and really appreciate all of you being here. So thank you so much for having us. And now I think we're going to go to some questions.
Yeah, so we'll be divided out into some breakout rooms, and we have 3 questions for you to work with there. The first question is going to help you get at what is the instinct that is probably most dominant for you. And one way to get at that is by asking the question, if you were given a Saturday that nobody else knew about, it's a complete extra Saturday on your calendar, free to do whatever you like, spend it however you want, with whatever resources you need to do it, how you want to do it. How would you spend your time? And based on that, ask maybe what what is the dominant instinct at play in that decision? And then the second question we have for you is this. To get at an instinct that's out of focus for you, we're going to go back to that question. What is a basic human skill that you feel really good about yourself when you accomplish it, or that you want credit for? As someone who's really low in self-pres, when I really clean our house, I want my husband to be freaking astonished and amazed and tell me that is just such an amazing thing you have done. But he's really high in self-pres, so instead he looks at me and says, yeah, we own a house. We clean it. That's what you do when you own a house. You clean it, right? And for him, he's really much lower in social instinct. So whenever I have like a dinner party or something at our house, he wants like credit for the next 3 days to not have any social engagements at all because he's already put in his time. So, so just think about what is the area that you feel like, wow, I just put my energy there. I should get a break now from everything else for a little bit. And then the third question we're going to ask you is, which instinct would you work with first to bring more balance into your life? And that'll be part of our commission as we go out at the end. So I'll turn it back over to Amanda or whoever's sending us to the room.